Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. Happy Tuesday, happy Tuesday. Welcome to Horror Stories Live. Hey, Monty, you doing all right? Welcome to Horror Stories Live, episode 26. So, Monty, what are you doing there, pal? Monty is being crazy. What would be good right now is if you don't chew on my headphones cord. That would be best. That would be the best thing for the show, really, right now. All right, so my my mascot is chewing on the cord. Hopefully he stopped. That's my water. Thanks. Wow. He, I love you, but you know. So anyway, yeah. Good evening, everyone. Let me know that you can see me and hear me as usual. Uh, that I need to know before I can proceed. So, all right. Kim sees all. She hears all. She knows all. She is also all powerful. I sent her an admin, well, I mean a moderator invitation for the Lovecraft Easing group, the community on Facebook. Did you get that, Kim? You are you're a moderator if you want to be. Not that there's a lot to moderate on that particular forum, but you know, you never know. You never know. Let's see. Trying to get the right combination of mood, and I'm not reading from a Kindle, I'm reading from a real book. So I do trust you. And I appreciate you becoming a patron more than I can say. I know you've had some difficulties, and obviously you said that when you could, you would. And you've been around for the show for a very long time. And so, yeah. Uh, Also, let me know. Someone mentioned to me a week or so ago, and I think it was just one person. They were getting uh, well, I just blanked on the word, but a little circle thing on their buffering. Let me know if you are, um, and let me know if you are not. All right, okay. So if you remember last week, exactly a week ago, it was Vincent Price's birthday. Thank you, Kim. And so I talked about his audio show, The Price of Fear, which I hope some of you have checked out because it is absolutely worth listening to. So I read a story. I read the waxwork from this book that they put out. They basically put out an anthology of some of the story, the original stories that they were adapted from. So I read the waxwork, and I'm going to read another story tonight for you guys. All right, so we got Hey Kelly and Frank, Kim, of course, Scott Thomas. Mr. Thomas, how are you? You guys, make sure you check out Scott's recent poetry book. Um, Title escapes me right now, but maybe you'll write it on the side chat, Scott. It's in print and Kindle, and it's on Kindle Unlimited as well. So, and oh, looks like Marianne is here too. And Marianne, I believe I sent you a moderator invite as well. Now you don't have to accept it if you don't want this huge responsibility. Seasons from ice to grain. Yes, thank you. Anyway, Scott, especially, you've got to check out The Price of Fear. It's on YouTube. I'm sure it's on archive.org and so forth. So, um, and the book is really cool too. It's just a nice little addition to have. That image in the front there is they used it on the show. All right, in Vincent Price's um, introduction, he writes about the story I'm going to read, Lot 169, which is another great adaptation on The Price of Fear. Quoting Vincent Price now, he says, Elizabeth Morgan wrote Lot 169 especially for radio, and her style is not only literary, but very much the product of an actress. As you read it, you will be amazed at how well it reads aloud. Hopefully that is also true tonight. It's an intriguing story, complicated but never losing your interest, because the writer, having had to thread her way through many scripts as an actress, requires of herself as a writer the most important thing in all drama, logic. This is especially true of all drama that has to do with mystery, horror, or what have you along those lines. So, the protagonist in he calls it 169, but it's actually lot 132. That's weird. The protagonist in lot 132 is Vincent Price himself in as a fictional version of himself in the radio adaptation. All right, so here we go. Lot 132 by Elizabeth Morgan. Do you have a consuming passion? I do not necessarily mean your mistress or your lover, but something else outside your daily work, like sport or gardening, archaeology or sewing, something that takes up all of those precious hours which are not committed to economic survival. If you do, then you will understand why I devote so much time to my consuming passion, painting. Do not suppose that I am a painter, though I must admit to some untutored daubing on a canvas from time to time. My passion lies in buying paintings, some for myself, more for galleries. I have pursued a painting from a continent's end to its beginning. The excitement lies half in the chase, half in the gamble, the backing of one's own judgment. By the way, I'm a huge fan of the writer Susan Hill. You may know her from The Woman in Black. She wrote that book. As I've mentioned many times on the podcast, she also wrote a book called The Man in the Picture. And The Woman in Black is a wonderful book. Is a great horror novel. Uh, The Man in the Picture is even better. It's a wonderful horror novella. It's right up there with John Langan's Anchor and Scott Thomas's Sea of Ash. Um, I have read it and reread it and reread it, and the audio version on Audible, I've had that for over a decade, and I've listened to it many times as well. Um, if you have not read The Man in the Picture, I cannot recommend it highly enough. And if you're an Audible member, um, you should pick it up for a credit. those of you who this is not your first Tuesday night horror reading know that I often go on tangents in between paragraphs as I think of things. So that's what's happening now. The man in the picture, Susan Hill. Right. Okay. It's not only a brilliant story, but it's brilliantly narrated by Paul Ansel. And I bring it up because it this story very much reminds me of the setup of the man in the picture. It's all to do with a man who collects paintings and a particular painting that maybe he should not have collected. And it starts off with it's this blustery winter night, and this guy is visiting one of his old college professors, one of those guys who, as it says in the story, is a dying breed. He's married to his college. He he lives on campus, um, and as the wind howls about them, they are drinking port. And as he says, we put the world to rights between us. And then he started talking to me about this painting, and it's absolutely one of the best novellas you'll ever read. And this first paragraph just made me think of it. Anyway, back to the story. As you may imagine, this passion of mine has led me to the strangest places and into situations one would never have thought possible. There was one such situation which was so bizarre, so frightening, and so disastrous as to be almost unbelievable. It all came back to me only a few weeks ago when driving through Winchester, for it was there, in that awful town 20 years ago, that I unwittingly triggered off an awful chain of events. The day was cold, as I remember, and probably as much to keep warm as anything else, I'd strolled into a small auction room just off the main street. At the time, I had an interest in a small gallery in London, so naturally I was drawn to the paintings. The sale had not yet started, so I quickly went through the few that were catalogued. It was then that I saw Lot 132, described as Portrait of a Man, early 19th century, English school, artist unknown. He was wearing a crimson riding jacket and looked about 45, with black hair, a large bony face, and small, clearly set eyes. Certainly here was a painting of some quality, but I felt no desire to possess it. There was something oddly unnerving about that face, particularly the eyes. The sale started, and soon I began to feel warm enough to sally forth into the freezing town, but I could not bring myself to leave the auction room. My gaze continued to be drawn to the portrait, an uncomfortable sensation. When the auctioneer announced Lot 132, I looked around the room, curious to see who would want it. £15, £17. I felt compelled once more to look at the portrait. The next moment I was looking at the auctioneer and raising my hand. There I was, against my will, bidding for a portrait by an unknown artist of an unknown man. £22, 24, 26. I heard the gavel come down. Gone at £26. Name, sir? The portrait was mine, but I did not have my usual elation about the purchase. I decided it must be my own illogical hypersensitivity to the face that was at fault. When I returned to London, I put the painting in a small anteroom of the gallery and forgot all about it. A few days later, I was sitting in the gallery when an old acquaintance, Michael Emsley, called to see me. I had not seen him for some time, for though he was a city broker, he and his family lived in a small Berkshire village and were rarely in town at the weekend. He came towards me smiling. "Michael," I said, "you look more like a farmer each time I see you." He laughed. "I wish I were." More preliminary exchanges over, I inquired after his wife, Marion, a beautiful, charming creature, and their delightful children. It appeared Marion was the reason he had come to visit me. He wanted to buy a modestly priced painting for her birthday, so we wandered through the gallery's rooms, discussing each painting in turn. Suddenly he stopped. "That portrait over there, I don't know. It seems to draw me to it. Though I must say I don't particularly like the chap's face, yet I feel," he searched for the word, "compelled to look at him." I had noticed that. Throughout our conversation of the past hour, no matter where Michael had been standing in the gallery, he had turned, time and time again, to stare at the face. "Do you know what I mean?" he asked. "I do indeed," I replied. "I had the same experience when I bought it in Winchester only last week." At the mention of Winchester, his face lit up. "I say, what a coincidence. That's Marion's hometown." Then he told me how she had always longed to have a few family portraits on the walls. Without thinking, I said, "Suppose our unknown man is an unknown ancestor." We laughed. Michael paused for a moment, then, to my amazement, asked whether he could buy the portrait. I suggested he had Marion's approval first before committing himself. After all, she may not like him. "Oh, that's a point," he replied. And so, after we had exchanged a transaction slip, Michael Emsley took the portrait, promising to give me Marion's answer in a couple of weeks. I must admit, I was not sorry to see it go. One evening, about 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my study at home, browsing through a recently acquired folio of early 19th century drawings and engravings. Imagine my delight when halfway through I turned up an engraving based on that very portrait. What was more, I found it had been painted by one Jacob Robertson, a painter just now becoming popular, in 1825, and the sitter was identified as Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell, 1782 to 1830, a merchant. The name rang a bell, but nothing more. I was about to telephone Michael the news of my discovery and to tease Marion about old Uncle Nat when I noticed the time. It was almost 10:30. I always dislike being disturbed by telephone after 10, so I decided to leave the call till morning. Next day, I called the Emsley household. A voice unknown to me answered the telephone. Unfortunately, neither Michael nor Marion appeared to be available, but nevertheless, I explained briefly about the portrait and my discovery, adding that I was a friend of the family. I was somewhat surprised when the voice asked me how long I had known the Emsleys. Thinking this was quite unnecessary, I asked, "Why? Who are you?" I can't talk over the telephone, but if you'd care to drive down, sir, I'd be grateful. Yes, but who are you? I demanded. Chief Inspector Lowther, sir. Murder Squad. Within minutes, I was in the car, heading for the Berkshire village. All I could hear, all I could think about were the words Murder Squad. What in God's name had happened? Quite right, Kim. Quite right. Uh-oh. My heart was pounding as I drew up at the house. Chief Inspector Lowther met me at the door and took me inside. He opened the door of the sitting room. What do you think of this, sir? I could hardly believe my eyes. I turned to the inspector. This room looks as if it had been ravaged by some madman. Madman's the right word, sir, the inspector replied. I asked where the Emsleys were. Mr. Emsley's at headquarters, he said. He's been taken into custody, given himself up, and Mrs. Emsley's dead, sir. Murdered. My head was reeling. The children, Inspector, for pity's sake, where are they? Let me take them. He looked at me and shook his head. They're dead too, sir. At this point, I felt physically sick. My knees seemed about to give way, so I sat down in the only chair left undamaged in that room. As I did so, I noticed lumps and streaks of blood splattering the walls, curtains, and carpet. The inspector must have thought I was going to pass out because he poured me a brandy, and we went outside into the fresh air. Gradually, after a moment or two, he began to unfold the ghastly details of the past 12 hours. At about 10:30 on the previous evening, ironically, the time when I was about to pick up the telephone, Michael Emsley, for no apparent reason, had gone berserk and had attacked his wife with a hatchet, afterwards throwing her pulped, torn body into the swimming pool. As for the children, he had put weed killer in their milk. The forensic department had established their time of death at 9 o'clock. I could still hardly believe all I'd seen, all I'd been told, that it was just not part of some frightful nightmare. The inspector turned back towards the house and sighed. It's just about the most hideous case I've ever known. He questioned me carefully about Michael. Not being a close friend, I could not tell him very much except that he was the gentlest of men, completely devoted to his wife and family. There seemed to be no clue to this sudden, unaccountable violence. How you doing, Monty? That's my little cat buddy. Then I spoke to their old housekeeper, Mrs. Thomas. It was she who had raised the alarm. The poor woman was deathly white and was clearly distraught as she recounted how she had found Michael by the swimming pool at midnight, crying and whimpering like an animal in pain. Where was Mrs. Emsley? I asked. She began to cry. I was too late. He'd already killed her, but it was the children. My poor little loves, do you know what happened? I wanted to leave. I did not want to know any more. But I could not stop her torrent of words and tears. If only I hadn't let him take up their bedtime drink. Didn't he usually? I asked. She looked up at me. Oh, no, I did that always, but Last night, he fairly snatched the mugs off the tray and told me to get out of the way. She paused and dabbed her eyes. A lovely, happy man like him who'd never say a cross word to anybody. I asked her if he had been unwell recently. Not that I know of, she said, but he had been a bit funny for about a fortnight, bad-tempered with Mrs. Emsley and the children, like he was with me last night. I suggested that perhaps he was worried about his work. She shrugged her shoulders. I know Mrs. Emsley was getting worried about him. The way he'd sit in his study for hours, just brooding, not himself at all. Mrs. Thomas then began to sob so pitifully, telling me that it was all her fault, that she should have stopped him. It was useless to try and placate her, because besides, she needed to weep the horror out of her confused mind. Before leaving, the inspector reminded me about the portrait, and when he saw the transaction slip, suggested I take the painting back with me to London. We went to Michael's study. It was hanging over the fireplace, and for a moment we looked at it together. The inspector gave a wry smile. A thoroughly evil-looking so-and-so, isn't he? He said. Evil. That was it. I did not know you could actually smell evil, but you can. That study stank of it. Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell seemed to dominate us, and I felt an aura of what I can only call satanic triumph emanating from the canvas. But I tried to put this down to imagination and my own wretched state of mind. As I left the house, the police had started to empty the pool of its red water. It was a sickening sight. Within hours, the portrait was once again in the back room of the gallery, and though privately I had decided either to lose it or even destroy it, I said nothing to my partners. I could hardly tell them I had destroyed a painting of quality simply because I did not like the sitter's face, or that I had a feeling about it. They would have thought me, well, certainly capricious. The next morning I flew to New York on a prearranged business trip, and a month later found myself in a library in Washington. Idling away an hour or two in between appointments, I came across a newly published encyclopedia of criminals and criminology. Flicking through the pages, I found this entry. Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell, 1782 to 1830, hanged in London for the murder of wife and children, brutally assaulted wife with hatchet, throwing body into river, poison put in children's gruel, nicknamed Killer Satan. So that was it. Blackwell's evil was still alive. How else could one account for Michael Emsley's behavior? But despite instinct, I couldn't logically dismiss the possibility of coincidence. However, I did not intend to take any chances. The portrait had to be destroyed. Immediately, I canceled all further engagements, and next day flew back to London. Can you imagine my horror when on arrival at the gallery I found the painting had been sold 3 weeks previously? I had to work quickly. The records showed that it had been bought by a Peter Smith living in Norwich. Fortunately, the name of his bank had also been recorded. I should have realized they never divulge clients' telephone numbers. You don't understand. It's urgent. I must get in touch with him. I shouted. If you write, we'll forward the letter, replied a cozy voice. My hands trembled as I slammed the telephone down. Directory inquiries was the next step. It took me 15 minutes to be told finally that there was no Peter Smith living in Norwich, but there was a Peter Smith Ltd., an engineering company. I had nothing to lose, so I called the factory. The telephone rang and rang. I prayed that someone would answer. I was about to put the receiver down when a lugubrious voice at the other end announced that he was the caretaker. I must speak to Mr. Peter Smith quickly, I snapped. Not here. The factory is closed down, he drawled. Look, I must get in touch with him. Sorry, sir. He's moved. It were about 3 weeks ago. My heart sank. I could feel the receiver sticking to my clammy palm. Surely you know his new address, I asked. I don't. To brace this book. I don't. It's not Norwich, I can tell you that. Away somewhere. No kidding. Have you any idea where? I implored. He laughed. Could be Scotland. We both fell silent for a moment. I was trying to think of another question to put to him when he said, Tell you what, the foreman, what used to be here, might be able to help. I shall have to phone him, though. He might not be in, of course. He took my number and promised he would call if he had any information for me. Convinced I should never hear from him again, I poured myself a large brandy in order to calm my bewildered senses. I felt utterly defeated until abruptly the telephone rang. My hand leapt across the table to pick it up, and I thanked 1,000 gods when I heard him speak. The foreman said something about Essex or Sussex. That's right. A snifter, John. That's right. Anything else? I wanted to shake the information out of him. Hey, something Heath. That's what it sounded like. Hayward Heath? I suggested. Yes, that was it. I did not wait to hear any more. Within minutes, I had the number. Mrs. Smith answered the telephone. Luck was on my side at last. I told her there had been some confusion over the portrait, that my partner was unaware I had promised it to another client, and that all this had happened during my business trip to the States. I'm getting old. Fibromyalgia, arthritis, you name it, it doesn't matter. Equals pain. I waited, wondering whether she would make the next move. The ball was in her court. She did. Do you want to buy it back then? Well, Mrs. Smith, it would save me a great deal of embarrassment, if that were possible. I tried not to sound over anxious. By all means, so far as I'm concerned, she said. I can't stand the portrait. It gives me the creeps. But my husband seems quite fond of it. She laughed. I felt a cold shiver down my spine. Fight the power, John. Fight the power. Where exactly is the painting? I asked. It's hanging in his study, she replied. We agreed that I should drive down to see her husband later the same day. Could you make it about 8:30? She asked. I'll have the children to bed by then, and we'll have more chance to talk. Coincidence? Imagination? I could not take the risk. This time, I was backing my instinct. I had to reach the Smith's house before the children were put to bed. I arrived about 8 p.m. and left the car parked outside the front gates. As I walked up the long drive, sheer natural curiosity urged me to peer through the window of a small garden shed. You know what I'm going to read next, don't you? Standing on a workbench was a large tin, clearly marked weed killer, poison. I quickened my steps to the house. Hang on. Oh, well, sleep is good too. I quickened my steps to the house. Approaching the front door, I could now see the gardens, which lay at the back. When I saw the ornamental fish pond, my stomach turned. Weed killer, water, coincidence again? Mrs. Smith came to the door. She was younger than I had imagined, an attractive woman by any standards. I apologized for being a little early. That doesn't matter. Please come in, she smiled. Instead of leading me into the drawing room, as is customary in such circumstances, that is what I always do. Ha! I saw it, John. You don't have to retract messages like that. It's funny. Anyway, instead of leading me into the drawing room, as is customary in such circumstances, Mrs. Smith hesitated, and in a lowered voice said, I haven't had time yet to tell my husband about our telephone conversation, this portrait business. I think we're sure, Kim. Yeah. Don't worry, I said. I'll talk to him. She looked slightly at ease. That's just it, she said. I'd like to explain about my husband before you do. Is he ill? I asked. Oh, no, not physically, that is, but he may just give you a false impression, that's all. How do you mean? I inquired. She frowned. Well, he's feeling very depressed at the moment. Life in general, I think. Yeah, now's the time to run up into that study and yank that thing off the wall. I need to adjust the mic. Why, what happened? Did my volume go down? Better? Okay. Thanks. No, thank you. I didn't even know I lowered the mic. Just absent-minded. All right, thank you for telling me. And I hope that was only a second or two ago. Anyway, I told her she should not worry, that we all felt depressed from time to time, and that I understood perfectly. No, I don't think you do, she said. He's so moody and irrational, completely unpredictable. I mean, he's even short-tempered with me and the children. I knew I had heard similar words before, but I tried to dismiss this ugly thought from my mind. I asked her whether he had displayed these tendencies in the past. For a brief moment her face became relaxed and she smiled a little sadly, I thought. Never, she said. He's always been such a happy, easy-going person, relaxed. Not like me, she added and laughed. The lines of stress returned to her face when she told me her husband had been in this state of mental depression for about 3 weeks. I thought it was the upheaval of moving house, so we went away to the coast last week for a break. And was he better? I asked. Much, she said, but within a few hours of being home, he was just as bad. Trying to keep my head and determined to be logical. What? Why the hell would you want to do that, dude? I think there's a pattern asserting itself here, sir. Scott Thomas likes it when I comment. I do story commentary on the story that I'm reading. I suggested that perhaps her husband had problems connected with his work and that she might talk to him. What a great idea. Jesus. He's depressed. Maybe he needs to talk to somebody. Her voice became tense and nervous. She said, "Please don't think I haven't tried, but he won't talk to me. He takes himself off to his study and sits there for hours on end, alone." She stopped abruptly and sat quietly. "Do forgive me, letting my hair down like this to a complete stranger. I'm so sorry." To this day, I do not think I have seen anyone epitomize mental anguish quite so completely as Mrs. Smith did that evening. However, I reassured her. "On the contrary," I said, "you've been a great help to me. Thank you." Then she made a brave attempt to make light of our discussion. "As a matter of fact, things may be improving. Just before you arrived, Peter insisted he took the children's bedtime drink to them. He almost threw me out of the kitchen." I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my body and my heart began to palpitate wildly. "Where is he now?" "In the kitchen making it," she laughed. "Yes, oh dear," or as Piglet would say, "oh dear." As if on cue, the kitchen door opened and Peter Smith walked out. A tall, well-built man with dark hair. He carried a tray on which were 2 mugs. When he saw me, he glowered. I knew I had to stop him somehow, so I edged to the foot of the stairs. Quickly, I thought if I held out my hand as if to shake his, I could easily send the tray flying to the floor. "Darling," said his wife, "this is—" "Get out of my way," he snarled. I put out my hand. "How do you do, Mr. Smith?" I sent the tray crashing on the tiles. He looked at me furious. "You stupid, bloody fool!" I apologized most profoundly and offered to clear up the mess, but Peter Smith was not to be appeased. He stormed out of the hall shouting, "Damn you! Damn you!" A door slammed. Yeah, someone needs to get back on the antipsychotics or get rid of that painting. Whatever, one or the other, or both. "Mrs. Smith," I said, "I know this is hardly the time, but I really must talk to you about talk to your husband about that portrait." She had been completely unnerved by this episode. Her tense fingers began to move restlessly over the watch strap which loosely encased a wrist. "Yes, of course," she replied. Yep, you're right, Kelly. I looked around. Where did he go? She sighed. To his study, and gave a little shrug. Where else? We crossed the hall. The study door was closed. Mrs. Smith knocked and called, Someone to see you, darling. We waited, but there was no answer. She knocked again, this time gently opening the door. We went inside and saw Peter Smith sitting at a desk, his back toward us, staring up at the portrait of Nathaniel Blackwell. In a second, I recognized the same smell of evil in that room, and I felt afraid. Quietly, his wife shut the door behind us. Do you feel all right, darling? She asked. Instantly, Peter Smith sprang out of his chair and turned to face us. In his hand, he held a small hatchet, his face contorted with hate. All right, no judgments, but I think this guy is in a murdering state. In his hand, he held a small hatchet, his face contorted with hate. You bitch! You whore! He shouted and sprang towards his wife. Wow. The poor woman was frightened out of her wits. Peter, what's the matter with you? She cried. Quickly, I moved between Smith and the desk, and standing behind him, grasped both his wrists. He hurled another savage, ugly stream of abuse at his wife, who was now almost hysterical with terror. Well, there's years of therapy coming. He struggled with me, but I clung on, finally managing to wrench the hatchet out of his grasp. As I swung around, my eyes met those of Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell, and then I knew. Either the portrait must be destroyed or we should be. His evil was still alive, dominating, commanding. Then Peter Smith, with a lunatic strength, threw himself at me. I shouted to his wife, Hold him, keep him back. It's the portrait. I must destroy the portrait. Hold him. How's his wife going to hold him? He yelled at me, You fool, leave it alone. I cannot remember clearly what happened next, but Mrs. Smith must have tried to restrain her husband, for she cried, Peter, stop it, for God's sake. Immediately, he released me from his fanatical hold. Had he not, I doubt whether I should be alive now to recount the story. Exactly. Immediately, However, within seconds, he focused his madness on the real objective of this murderous attack, his wife. This Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell must have been quite the misogynist as well as a murderer. And he's got the standard serial killer 3 names, too. He screamed at her again and again. Bitch! Bitch! He gripped at her throat. She gasped and fought for breath. At that moment, I knew that I had to act quickly, or Mrs. Smith would surely die. I raised the hatchet and struck at the portrait. With the first blow, Peter Smith released his wife, cried out in pain, and reeled round the room. I struck at Blackwell's eyes, nose, mouth, chest. I felt possessed, overwhelmed by anger and hate. But Smith, his strength ebbing away with each blow, began to cry like a baby. Finally, the picture cord gave way, and as Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell slid to the floor, Peter Smith uttered an agonizing moan. stumbled and fell on the study carpet where he lay, motionless. Mrs. Smith slowly fell on her knees beside the still body of her husband. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She turned to me and said, "He's dead, isn't he?" "No," I said. "Your husband has simply been released. Just wait a while." A moment later, Peter Smith opened his eyes and looked up at his wife. It was a look of tenderness and love. He smiled at her. "Darling, what happened?" His poor wife dissolved into tears, so it was left to me to assure him all was well. Now, when her tears had subsided, Mrs. Smith asked me whether he would remember anything of this dreadful experience. "Only as one remembers a nightmare," I said. "At first, a few details will remain clear, then gradually, in time, all will be forgotten. By you too, Mrs. Smith." When Peter Smith eventually rose to his feet, he put an affectionate arm round his wife and asked, I I haven't hurt you, have I, darling?" She gave him a very direct look, smiled, and said quite truthfully, "No, my love, you haven't. Not you." He laughed. "I must have had a very bad dream." What strange powers a painting can have, sometimes good, but in the case of Nathaniel Jeremiah Blackwell, decidedly evil. Hours later, after I had burned what remained of the painting, I told the Smiths the whole story. But there was one thing I did not tell them. When the portrait crashed to the ground and Peter Smith lay cold on the study floor, I noticed the vermilion paint of Blackwell's hunting jacket had come off the canvas and lined the knife edge of the hatchet. That was understandable, but why it so much appeared on my hands and streaked my wrists. Old paint should flake, or powder, but this was wet, very wet. When I washed my hands a few minutes later, I knew why. It was not paint. And they all lived happily ever after. Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed the story. Let that be a lesson to you about buying paintings, but let it also be a lesson to you that you need to read The Man in the Picture. Seriously. Now, if next week I'm going to ask you guys if you have The Man in the Picture, and if you don't, I I will just remind you again. Anyway, hey guys, thanks for listening. Um, I hope you're having a great Tuesday night. Thank you, Scott. Madeline, wow, all the way from Australia. It's, let's see, what time is it where I am? It's almost 10 o'clock, so it must be like noon where you are, something like that. I saw your email. Thank you so much, and I'm going to reply to it tomorrow. Um, I was close. I was an hour off. Um, and to those of you who are Patreons, even the lowest tier, the $5 a month, helps me immensely, and helps me emotionally. So thank you. and I'll find something to read for next week, and we will see you on Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.